this thought around web scraping. Every time I like say web scraping to most developers, you can kind of see them like curl up a little bit, like, oh, that don't say that around me. It's kind of a dark part of the internet, but it serves a big purpose. And I think,
Yeah.
kind of bringing that to light a little bit more would do it well.
Hello, welcome to devtools-fm. This is a podcast about developer tools and the people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hey, everyone. We're really excited to have Joel Griffith on today. So, Joel, you are the founder and CEO of Browserless, which is a pretty cool company. I've actually used Browserless a few times, so it's like fun to have you on. Browser automation kind of sucks, and y'all do a good job at it. So, props for that. We're excited to chat more about what you're doing today, but before we dig into that, I would love to just hear a little bit more about you. So, would you like to give us an intro?
Yeah, I'll give you the TLDR, hopefully. Thanks for the intro and the kind words. Really happy and excited to be on the podcast. So yeah, Joel, founder and CEO of Browserless.io. Wasn't an engineer when I started 12-ish, 13 years ago, and then became an engineer, wanting to solve my own problems a little bit with websites and whatnot for bands and stuff I was playing in. And then similar sort of thing happened with Browserless, to be honest. I was working on a few things and I was like, hey, this really sucks. It could be better. And then kind of had an aha moment when I was building something else at the same time and kind of reran into another web automation problem. I was like, why does this still suck? So yeah, kind of did a pivot then and, launched Browserless, and it was a good fit, as in kind of a engineer myself and knowing the language and the people and, where they hang out and all those things. Definitely made it a lot easier to kind of like, find first users, had an easier time talking to customers. I think especially in tech, you get used to this like weird metaphorizing of like technical problems such that, laymen or lay people can understand what you're saying. And I don't have to do that, which is great. It's not my best skill. I try, but anyways, so yeah, that's the quick, very, very quick about me. And yeah, we could go any direction from there, to be honest. So yeah.
So before you were a developer, you were a jazz trumpet player. That's that's pretty out there. How did that switch happen? It seems like a seismic shift almost.
It is. Yeah, there was two things. One of them is kind of sad, and one of them is just kind of like opportunistic. So, at the time as a jazz trumpet player, was about to have my first kid. And we go in at 20 weeks for this ultrasound and realized there was some like abnormalities, and they weren't good ones, to be quite honest. And so, my wife and I were looking at this long list of things that we needed to do. And I was like, I don't know if as a musician, we can afford those things that might need to come up. And so it was somewhat out of, external pressures or external things that had happened that kind of like, I don't want to say forced me into technology, but like strongly encouraged me to get back into technology. I always loved hacking on the side, even in like high school was writing programming calculator functions for friends and selling those for like $1 or $2 or a soda or something. So there was that kind of like trait I had for a long time. And then, this happened with, a kid. And so that really kind of was like, okay, I really should see, what I'm capable of here and if I can make it happen. So that was the big function. And then the second thing was the store that I was working at, music store. Actually, you can go look it up on my LinkedIn profile. You can see I was director of internet services at a music store. They were getting pitched a website and they were getting charged a lot for said website. And I remember looking at this with the owner at the time and I was like, man, if you could give me like a couple days, couple weeks, I think I could probably build this, if I'm allowed to on company hours. So it was kind of those two things kind of fusing together at the same time. The timing was fortunate. And yeah, so did that. This was 2012. So we didn't have Flexbox. We didn't have much, no AI. So it was a lot of like, the Peter Griffin gif of him like trying to get the blinds to go in the right way with, horizontally and vertically centering things in CS. That was like my life for the first 5 years, in a nutshell. So, yeah, but I loved it. It was fun. I came to it, every day after work. I was still like, oh, let's do some more. Like, let's figure this other thing out. So, having that, I guess, part of you is really, really, really important in tech. Even with AI, it's still, I think, you have to be kind of like a tinkerer at heart or curious by heart to get into it. So, yeah. Anyways, that's the longer form version of how I got into technology.
Yeah,
It's a cool story.
I wouldn't wish block or table layout on my worst enemy.
Yeah.
Do you remember having to like float left and then clear both? I think was the hack. Even nowadays, I'll start writing a class and it's like clear. No, I got to stop that, Joel. Like we've got Flex. We'll just use
Yeah.
Flexbox.
IE6, IE8 support. Awful. Anyway, moving on to brighter topics. So you've done a lot since then, and props to you for that. So you've got Browserless now, which is a bootstrapped company, which I think is incredible. That's the hard mode for building a company. Good on you for taking that on. Could you kind of walk us through, like, you'd mentioned your aha moment earlier. Like, what was that? Like, what was the inspiration? It's like, I need to do browser automation.
Yeah. So I was working on a site that lets you like create a wish list for birthdays or anniversaries or whatever. I'm sure most people on listening will understand that, like, hey, it's your birthday. What do you want? Like, oh, let me go to Amazon or whatever and create a wish list. But I was like, I don't want just stuff from Amazon. I don't love Amazon. Like, they're great and everything, but like, I'd rather like venture out, to other things too. So anyways, I was building an app that kind of just did that. So you could just paste a link into something that you wanted and it would, grab price, pictures, metadata, all those things. And then at the time it was target.com was running as like a spa single page app. And so none of that metadata was available unless you parsed and ran JavaScript to get that data. And so this was back in like 2018, 2017. And so I was honestly at the right place and time, ran into this problem. Puppeteer was still like pretty new onto the scene. I think, what was it that was before like Puppeteer and Headless Chrome? There was a Phantom JS, just like that maintainer had said, hey, see, I'm done. Goodbye. Google's got this now. And so right time and place, probably a little early to be honest. So the first few years were pretty slow growth. I mean, I ran the company by myself for the first 4 years roughly, and worked full time. So yeah, it is kind of hard mode. You either got to like subsidize your living with either ramen profitability is bootstrappers like to say, or you work another job and fund your living with that. So yeah, kind of worked 2 jobs for a long time until it got to a place where it was predictable enough, profitable enough that I could do my own thing. But yeah, I think that wish list was like the turning point. Thinking about, if I ran into this, other people are going to run into this. And then I was even looking at like Puppeteer issues, like sorted by the most commented. And the first one was, how do I get this to run in Linux? And I think that was actually the aha moment, was like, oh man, if this is the number one pain point, maybe I could do that and start a service that, that's all it does, is just browsers as a service. So, yeah, that was the start and, the big realization. So, and then, looking back now on 8-ish years, like a lot of other things just kind of happened that I wasn't even aware of or, working towards. It just happened organically a little bit. Like, love developers, kind of like how I started the top of this was like, I spoke the language. I knew who they were. I knew their struggles. I knew what it was like to be in the trenches with them. So that helped a lot. Just kind of like knowing and what the struggles are and, speaking the jargon and all that.
So for devs who might not have like tried to run browsers like in the cloud at scale, what problems are there? Why can't I just string together the tools that are out there now and do something similar?
Oh man, where to begin? There's a lot. Like out of the box, it's gotten a lot better out of the box. Like you could grab Play right now. It even has like a sample Docker file, and that'll get you like 90% of the way there. There were some funky things a few years ago where it was like you ran the Docker file and inline the code that you wanted to run. So there's just kind of like some weird API, boundaries. My mental model for like how this was going to work was treating it almost like a hosted database in a sense. Like, you get a URL, username, password, you connect it, but the database doesn't do everything for you. Like you still need to tell it, like, hey, I want this structure, rows, those sorts of things. And even today, like the Playwright Docker files, other ones don't feel like that to me. They're still kind of like very opinionated on how you use that Docker file. And I wanted it to be a little more open and, generally available and just kind of have some like best practices encoded into it. But so that was the biggest problem, I think. And then, all sorts of other things like running into system fonts, other system packages you might need for this weird part of Chrome to work or WebGL or whatever it is. There's just a lot of like gotchas, a lot of sharp edges that you run into having done it for a few years. And like over a weekend, sure, you can get up and running perfect, but then you're going to be like constantly maintaining that baby and it going for the next, I don't know, I'd say 6 months probably, until you've kind of like, okay, this is not fun to deal with anymore. I should not be thinking about this problem. But that's just a start, to be honest. And then there's, new binaries that come out all the time. And so you're constantly having to update that. And like, do you have a CI to test that like the new binary runs the same way that the prior one did? And like, no, I mean, we have like several hundred specs now that run on every binary change. So, I guess it's like, how much of this problem do you want to own, or do you want to outsource? So that's kind of like the ultimate trade-off, I think, is like deciding I'm done with this, I'll just outsource it. And that's kind of where we are, a natural fit and a good fit.
Yeah, I imagine there's like all these other sort of like system properties. Like browsers are very complicated. You're talking about switching out binaries. I mean, I know that you've sort of written about like JavaScript memory leaks and like other like challenges that you have at like running these at scale. I'm curious, can you talk like in more depth about some of like concrete challenges? So be it memory leaks or process isolation, whatever. Like, what have been the big meaty things that's like been hard to work through?
Yeah, it's honestly, if I could put it into a sentence, the hardest parts are the things you don't easily find on the internet. There's like weird combination of Chrome CLI flags that help it run better, or in a more like user-ish type way. And they're really even Chrome CLI flags. There isn't a centralized doc site for Chrome launch flags. There's like I can't remember the guy's name, Peter Lou. It's like some developer tried at one point to do a description for all of them, but so many of them still have like no comments. So a lot of it's trial and error. And like again, you'll get an update to Playwright. There'll be new Chrome binaries or whatever, and they break for whatever reason you don't know. And so now you got to go figure out why that is. And usually it's like, oh, this right combination of Node, Ubuntu, and Playwright, there's a missing package that just isn't there yet. So you're like too far on the bleeding edge, and you got to like downgrade Node or downgrade, Ubuntu or whatever the base OS is. So, just like hundreds of those kinds of things, really, to be honest, they just pile up, and it's like, this again. So you got to go, dig it back up. But honestly, that's one of my favorite parts. I love taking something that maybe shouldn't work or, isn't supposed to, and then like coming through, and being excited about that and having that aha moment, like, oh yeah, I did get it. It just took a lot of trial and error. So those parts, but then, that's the big picture. Node memory leaks are always a fun one. Like as an example, we had this interesting bug where we were splatting objects into an array, and splatting from one JavaScript object into a new one, and like probably creates a shallow clone, and then there's a memory leak there. And so it was like better not to do that in a like map reduce function. It's better to just keep the original one and mutate it. So there's a bunch of stuff that you run into like that, where it's like, this doesn't look good. It's not a good practice, but man, does it perform well. And I don't run out of memory when I'm doing it. So that was a pretty big one. It was like, okay, all the new fun array methods, sometimes they don't work out. They look good and they, run well, but like the compilers or whatever haven't caught up to, handling those performantly. That was a big one. Whole bunch of other war stories too. We've had fun with Nginx and trying to get it to do things sanely, and I don't know. Yeah, it can go on and on and on.
Yeah, lots of not fun issues to deal with there. Being on the bleeding edge has its pros and its cons, but there's usually a lot of cons.
It's funny because now I get people come up and be like, oh, like you're so, so much about these things. Is like, no, man, I just like, somebody gave me a hammer and said, learn how to use a hammer. And I just did a bunch of hammering and have bruises all over. And now I'm the expert at hammering. Is like, no, somebody gave it to me. I just had fun with it. And now I guess I'm an expert or something. So yeah, that's how it goes.
Yeah. So you made a pretty useful hammer, and it's a pretty generic hammer as well. So like, what are like the types of use cases that you've seen people use Browserless for? And like, have there been any that just like completely surprised you? You're like, oh, I would never have thought of that thing.
Yeah, there have been, and there's ones that people still haven't used it for. And I'm like, man, that would actually be kind of a cool product to build. So maybe I'll give one out here in a minute. But like the three big use cases we see, I mean, like data scraping, which is what I sort of had built it for initially. Automating third-party systems that are like either antiquated, don't have a REST API, those kinds of things, which seems to come up a lot in like third-party logistics. Oddly enough, I never thought I would be in third-party logistics, but here I am doing stuff with third-party logistics and shipping ports and everything. Testing's a big one. And then, like asset generation is what I call it, but like screenshots or PDFs or videos. Like we had an ad tech company that was taking like HTML5 ads and converting those to video. And so they would like screen record or stream those. Honestly, it's like every day I'm like, oh, that's cool. I didn't know you could do that. Like that's actually kind of a smart idea or good way of going about that. But the one, sorry, that I kind of like lead it up with was, there's been a big kind of a problem recently with, security, like NPM security and like package takeovers and, things of that nature. And there's like a really good amount of like dev tools in the browser. Like you can fire up a browser, go to a site, and, just by all the APIs that has, you can look at the package chain a little bit more and see like, hey, you're running this version of, whatever, which had a takeover at some point, and you should probably fix that. So there's like a lot of really cool security things I think you can solve with Headless Chrome. And there's been a few, companies that have done that in more of like a different way. But just like, that's a company I think in my mind is like loading up a website and just doing like a quick security posture snapshot. And like, okay, you're using these versions of this library, which are bad, or, you're not using SSL, HTTPS cookies, or, whatever it may be. And that's just, it's kind of low hanging fruit, I almost think, because it's really easy to see that in, Puppeteer, Playwright. So, yeah, all sorts of stuff, load testing websites to, governments testing for like compliance on, federal sites. And it's nuts. It's crazy. Every day it's something new, which honestly keeps me coming back. It's a lot of fun to see what people are building with it for sure.
Well, going beyond the use cases a little bit and just like to, how the technology works, I think there's this interesting challenge that you're probably facing today. So as AI started kicking up and, companies with LLMs were crawling more and more sites, like folks started locking down their sites a lot more. Services like Cloudflare started offering, bot protection solutions, scraping protection solutions. There's been a long time of like folks like, oh, we don't want people like scraping our data or whatever. I worked for Food Network for a while, and we had this problem with like recipe data. It's like, oh, do we like want people scraping? Like, do we try to block them or whatever? And I'm sure as you're building a product for this, you kind of go through that same thing. You're on the other side of it. It's like, we're enabling people to like get information, and we want to allow that, but the companies are trying to fight us because, the data is their moat, and they're like really holding on to it for dear life. So how do you navigate that? Like, what is that like?
It depends is the answer. Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of soul searching on this topic a little bit just personally. And, like I kind of go back to like the founding of the internet, like when the internet came about, like the whole point of it was like free, open information, like it wasn't locked behind encyclopedias or libraries or books you had to buy. Like it was accessible to just about everybody, and it was out there for you to take and do what you wanted. And so that's kind of the motive I sort of like try to base assumptions on is like, trying to lock portions of the internet down feels almost antithetical to the reason why the internet is the way it is. And so obviously I run Browserless, so of course I'm going to be more on the like, yeah, it should be free and open, accessible, blah, blah, blah. AI does bring a particularly interesting spin now, because now it floats on from like, okay, if everything's open and free and accessible, like who owns the ideas? Is there an owner? And then you get even further out into the philosophical weeds, like who are we? What is? What do we? We come with nothing, we leave with nothing. So do we actually own things anymore? But anyways, so trying to bring it back a little bit. Everybody does it. Everybody does web scraping at some point or other. And it's just, people say they do or they don't. And a lot of people just say they don't. But like, I can't think of a single business that at some point didn't do some kind of like, competitor analysis, obviously like e-com, this is big, they want to make sure that their pricing is competitive. And so in order to do that, you got to see what other prices are on the internet. So, um, it's just funny, like people will pull that lever to get data, but they're like, oh, we were not going to put our data back into that pot. No, no, sir. We'll block all that stuff out. And it's like, well, you're saying one thing and doing another now. So like, which one is it? Which side of the fence are you on, I guess? But anyways, I'm all for free and open. And for the last kind of like example I'll use for this, which is interesting, we're starting to see like certain, federal bodies, mostly in the EU, where they actually do need to get through Cloudflare on like fake or, false consumer sites. I can't remember what country, but that they have like a whole program where they literally scrape bad actors on the internet, and those bad actors use Cloudflare to bot block people checking them. So it's like it does flip on its head at some point. It's like, okay, now you have like legal bodies that are trying to use this technology to get through to see if something is legitimate or not. So anyways, just kind of a fun example to kind of like contrast against, because usually, yeah, it's always about like breaking through Cloudflare or whatever, and you're not supposed to. Well, it's like, well, no, there's times where that case is actually legal and justified. So I don't think it's all totally black and white.
So I guess the next question after that is like, do you think there's like a too far in that? Like, there's lots of legitimate use cases for the product. Do you view any use cases as like, that we shouldn't be doing that?
Yeah, I mean, intent is always, an interesting one. So like trying to suss out at the end of the day, like, what is it you're after? Is it good? Is it bad in like a moral sense, a legal sense? And so like there is a bit of a KYC process for us just to kind of like know what you're up to if you're going to do bad things. Fun example was like one of our first high paying users, like when we started, this guy was trying to like swing bets on I think like a poker site. And so he was firing up bots to do it. And I was like, no, man, that's not cool. I don't think that's good. So yeah, no, you can't do that on the platform. I'm sorry. Go find business elsewhere. And best of luck, I guess, in a sense. So yeah, it really comes down to intent. And that's, that's where it gets tricky and more nuanced, like what's a good thing, what's a bad thing. So yeah, we try to weigh each one in kind, and then, make sure that it aligns to, like our own moral and ethical code. So now we've got to go figure out what that is too. So I don't know, a lot of nuance, some of it's good, some of it's bad. Not all of it is bad is I think the biggest takeaway I would stress to people that are like kind of in this space or idiom for whatever reason. So, yeah, I think that, I don't know, to be honest, like that's a big thing for me this year is to kind of like try to flip a little bit the it's kind of like this thought around web scraping. Every time I like say web scraping to most developers, you can kind of see them like curl up a little bit, like, oh, that don't say that around me. It's kind of a dark part of the internet, but it serves a big purpose. And I think, kind of bringing that to light a little bit more would do it well.
Yeah, and I think it's worth acknowledging that like there are just like a lot of companies that don't have APIs. Like you have your data, you're a user, you've got stuff in there, and you just can't access any of it. Be it from a technical merit of like the company or product like just doesn't have the capabilities to build the APIs, or they don't want you getting your data because it's valuable to them, or whatever the reason be. Like I can definitely see all like a wide range of reasons why this is like good and necessary. I'll use one example that my company uses is we're a legal tech company and we watch the SEC marketing rules. So it's like when they publish a new update, we like, need to know, and sometimes it's just like, we'll just hit the page and kind of scrape some of the data and get that. And I feel like that's a very like normal, okay, like use case of that. And if they had better ways of us getting that data, then we do it, and like, just like sometimes, especially if it's government entities or whatever, that's the only way you can stay up to date.
It's the only way
you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, they're not going to move fast enough to have REST APIs. And to your point, like it seems easy for engineers, like, oh yeah, I'll just make a API to do that. But like, there's so many things you got to think about with that. Like, are you, doing tokens the right way? Are you making sure that those are all secure? Is the whole stack ready for it? I don't know. There's just, you open yourself up to more potential security vulnerability things with those kinds of things. So I get it, and it is funny. There's been a bunch of new like legal startups, and they're in it to save hours. They're trying to save like human effort, by scraping these sites. And, it makes a lot of sense to me. But yeah, it's hard to sometimes justify it to the person depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to sort of like tie all this back to a point that you made earlier, which I thought was really interesting. You're saying you're thinking about browserless initially is like, oh, well, I'm thinking about this as like a database service. And it's kind of cool that you have this feature called BrowserQL or like this kind of query language for scraping or like more like turning the internet into an API, which I like kind of like frame it as, which is really cool. I'd love to hear more about that. How did that come around? Like, what does it look like? Kind of, just more details there.
I had the thought of this, because that was our kind of like company thematic was, turning the internet into an API, and then we, tried to like, make the other part of me is like, well, let's make getting data on and off the internet as easy as like a SQL statement, right? Like, though they said other technologies, databases in particular, it's pretty easy to like, based upon like what you're asking, you kind of have an understanding of what you're going to get back. And, that didn't exist until, BrowserQL or BQL as we call it. And so that was the whole point was like, one, I want to make it more structured and easy. And like, it's based on GraphQL, which sorry if I've immediately lost half of your audience when I said that word. But the nice thing about GraphQL is like the shape of what you ask is the shape of what comes back. It's strongly typed. There isn't a language or framework barrier. And so there was just a bunch of like nice things you get off the shelf with it that I was like, man, this feels like a pretty interesting thing. I wonder if I can mix, headless automation with like a structured language. And that way we could offer it to, people that have to run PHP or Scala or, Go that don't have either like a really nice language to run or a nice framework to, do this type of work with. And so it just kind of opens the doors for those folks was another big reason. But yeah, there's also just like a lot you have to, Puppeteer and Playwright to their points are really good for what they're kind of focused on, which seems to be more and more towards testing. But there's a lot that, those libraries could handle for, users that they don't today. And it's because they take much more agnostic approach to, why you're using them. And so kind of having our own first class language was our way of like trying to do a little bit more and kind of getting at what, outcomes people wanted without having to be so kind of like overly dogmatic about like, oh, we're not going to do that because it's too opinionated or whatnot. So yeah, I think those are like the big benefits. And then like having a great editing experience is nice. Like if you play with our editor, it's like you write the statement, you run it, you see what the browser is doing, you got dev tools, all these things. It tries to like help coach and recommend a little bit like what could be better, what couldn't be. Obviously it's a new tool, so it does take a little bit of a hurdle to get over to learn it, but I think it's worth the trade-off because we do try to simplify a lot of things and not have to like make you think so much about like promises and, race conditions. Like that all's kind of handled for you, which is nice. So, yeah, I love it. It's my favorite part of the product, to be honest. I love like that's the first place I go when I need to like figure something out. So it's kind of nice to have it all in one place and docs and everything, and like one stop, so you're not having to like context switch a bunch. So, yeah, that's a lot. Well, we could dive into any of those things, but that's the kind of the big TL, very long did read part of it.
Yeah, I find it super interesting. You guys created a whole language around this, like an IDE. Like, how far did you guys go? Do you have like a language server? Like, how languagey is it?
Oh man, I wish. No, thank God we didn't write a lexer and a parser. Though I'm kind of debating if we should. There's some like bottlenecks, especially in the Node implementation for like GraphQL JS, just being single threaded, and I think some of the lexing and the parsing is still ran on the main thread. I don't know if they do it in the background, but they may have a C library now that does that. Anyways, neither here nor there. That stuff is thankfully off of our plate. Yeah, those are really challenging to solve sometimes. And I think, anytime you adopt a new technology, it's like, how much do you want to like put in this to yourself? How much ownership do you want versus how much can you just get off for free, if it meets your needs. So, yeah, kind of another reason for going GraphQL is like their editor is all componentized already in React, so it made it really easy to like build this remote viewer for the browser, and the dev tools part was really easy because we could just swap out those components. So yeah, big props to like Meta and their dev team for like kind of like getting the fundamentals right and getting the building blocks right, such that we can come and do this pretty easily, which is amazing to me, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting use case for GraphQL. I saw a random PR for like someone wanting to do or an RFD or something for like GraphQL and Chrome DevTools as a protocol. I don't know. It's something like that. I don't remember exact context. It just like cropped up on Twitter, and I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. We'll see if that happens.
Maybe relevant and useful.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's GraphQL somewhere, some layer. There's GraphQL
Yeah.
all the way down.
So yeah, kind of want to talk about your Browserless 2.0. So y'all done a lot of work. I spent a long time, kind of working on this like revamp of Browserless. It's been a few years now, I guess, since that point. And I'm curious, like, what sort of like led up to that, and like where y'all are at today. Have you like done another major version since then, or are you still sort of like rolling on those two? And like, I don't know, what's going on? What's new in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so 2.0 came. We wanted to have support for other browsers just besides Chrome and Chromium. So we do support WebKit and Firefox as well now. But supporting those made us rethink a lot about like how routing worked, and then like, what would need to change in order to support those two, and like, making it work in the 1.0 branch would have been probably possible, but there was just 1.0 was so focused on Chrome and Chromium that it felt like odd to have these other two vendors as well in there, and to be like, it just feels kind of like left-handed. It didn't feel like sort of like intentional. That's what we wanted. So it was like, I'm not a huge fan of breaking changes. I feel like you should spend the time, think about it a long time. The 2.0 release probably took me 8 months to just like going back and forth on like, how do I want routing to work? What should those look like file wise? What should the system take care of for you, and what should it not? And then like honestly, like building that up, using it and being like, nope, this isn't it. This doesn't feel right. I'm going to go back and rethink that part of it again. And so, yeah, I mean, it was, the culmination of all the years of building the first product and like going back to the drawing board, knowing that we have big breaking changes we want to make. Like, what other things do we want to do? So yeah, we, as one does, we built our own router. It supports WebSocket and REST at the same time, which was a big one that was hard to find, and it still kind of is, even in like Next.js. I think it still feels a little awkward or left-handed to have a WebSocket server, because you kind of like bind it to a global object, if I remember right, and then it's just kind of like accessible via outside references to get access to that object. And it's like, no, none of that feels right. So anyways, just seeing like all of that, and then wanting to use TypeScript and really like leverage a lot of TypeScript. So we have this fun build process where routes can define what they accept, what they return, and like query parameters too. And at build time, we look at all the routes, we take all those definitions, and we convert them into open API schemas. And then those are verified at runtime. This one took quite a while, and actually that build file is kind of insane for that, but it gets us a lot of stuff for free. So like if we have a property on a post body that is like directly corresponds to maybe like a Puppeteer API, any Puppeteer documentation comments they have on that API actually get passed through all the way to our route definitions and in our open API build as well. So you can like go and see exactly like the Puppeteer notes for that particular property, which I thought was like, oh, this is sweet, man. Like I get this for free. Like I don't have to go and like painfully like annotate like what is a cookie in Puppeteer parlance. Like it just passes through for free, which is awesome. And so yeah, anyways, all those things, multi-token work as well. Like wanted to just do a bunch of different features and stuff, which was just really hard into it to get into 1.0. So 2.0 is like a rebirth of everything, and like building on what made it successful, but also like keeping it more open for browsers and other better DevX performance boosts. And yeah, honestly, I'm happy with it. Like it's been, like you said, I think a couple of years now, maybe a year and a half. I don't really envision a 3.0 to be honest. Like,
Nice.
Yeah, don't make breaking changes unless you really have to. I think we actually have a blog post about this coming out soon. It's like yeah, like don't don't break if you really don't need to, and if you do, break all the things, because you might as well just get it done, when that event happens. So, um, yeah, fingers crossed there'll never be a 3.0 is my go-to. So we'll see what happens though.
A good goal. It's a lofty goal. It's surprising we work on a platform, the web, that does that. Like, it's kind of crazy to think that like they try to make no breaking changes forever. Like, I can't even imagine as a
That
library
is
op.
Yeah, that is a good point. You bring up a very great point. Like the fact that you can run JavaScript from IE 5 days today and it still parses and executes is like, that is a miracle that ever happened. So, yeah, very true, very true.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the data access stuff we were talking about. Like, the web doesn't feel like a platform that can die as easily as some like iOS apps. It's like Apple can
Yeah,
update the SDK, and then eventually you have an app that can't run on anything but an emulator that you can't run unless you have an old computer. It's like multiple layers of like, I can't do it anymore.
yeah. No, sorry, I had callbacks to running like the IE VMs from back in the day on like VirtualBox. I'm not sure if any of you have had to do that. Is like run the IE6 VM, and it's like, yeah, and then those stopped working after a while. Microsoft pulled the plug on those, and it's like, whoa, shoot, now what am I going to do? I have to go to like a secondhand store to find a Pentium 3 or whatever to run this operating system again? Like, yeah, it is crazy. It is crazy.
Cool. So moving on to the next topic, we like to talk about open source and business models a lot on this podcast. You have a lot of open source out there. It's seemingly you can run your own browserless. So can you walk us through like how you think about open source and how you think about your product in relation to that?
Yeah. So I as an engineer myself, I got tons and tons of value from open source. Like, you almost can't give back enough for the amount of, benefit there is to open source. And so, thinking about that, and also, kind of like a personal sort of skill trait motive that I love is like showing, not telling necessarily. And so that was another reason for like trying to do open source. So like, I get it. People are in very different stages of their journey where it's like, I just need to do this thing on a personal project or whatever. It's like, great. Yeah. Don't even talk to us. Like, just grab the Docker file and go have a good day. Like, I don't want to have to like loop you into a whole bunch of sales calls and like do licensing and blah, blah, blah. So the motive here, for me to do open source was like, one, to show people that like, yeah, you can just, this is how it's done, how we do it. And so if that's all you need, awesome. I'm glad that we could have like helped you, and hopefully, someday you might need us or whatever. So great. We've had a good experience. The second part too is like, I was never an engineer, I never went to school for this. And then like, I kind of want to like show people like, hey, you can do really cool things, like really important things, and maybe they're outside of your reach. And like, use me as an example. And like, this is kind of like, I don't know, a way of showing a story or telling a story too, that's like a little more, at least grounded for engineers to like, Joel, he went from never having like opened up Git or a CLI to like doing this. So I think it's just another way to like illustrate what's possible for people. And especially now with AI too, it's like, it's even more accessible to just about any audience. You don't have to be an expert. I think there probably still is a reason to be an expert, but like, you can get a lot done and not know a lot, which is pretty cool. Obviously be careful with that, but yeah, so those are kind of like the motives. So yeah, the open source Docker image is free. You can download it, you can run it. It's never going to ask you for a license. It'll never bug you about it. It doesn't call back home. It'll log, I think, like a couple links, and that's it. So you can feel good about it that way, that you don't have to like drive, go to a website, sign up for a license key, put it in, all those sorts of things. But yeah, so on the commercial side, it's like, yeah, if you're going to use this for like something proprietary, then that's when you want to contact us and get a license. Or, it's hard to put that in like legal terms. There's always, I think we've tried 2 licenses at this point. I like the second one okay, but I think there's still some nuance I would try to tweak, but not a lawyer. It's really hard to get that out and like not piss off the wrong crowd, so to speak. Because yeah, at the end of the day, it's like, obviously got bills to pay and stuff. So, if we helped you be successful in your journey with whatever, we would love to partake in that success with you. So yeah, that's kind of the overall, I guess, motivation and thematicness around open source. But yeah, I'm actually kind of curious. Has it varied very much from folks that you've interviewed, or has it been? It seems like a crazy, to me, it still is messy. It's like kind of a problem, to be honest, is like funding open source projects doesn't really have like great answers. There's some, but they're like, they're too far on one side of the spectrum or another. I'm kind of curious if both of you or either of you have seen, changes in that.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen all sorts of things. I do think like you see more and more of the like open core model like collapsing a little bit. This has like been very classic around like database companies, for example. So you use the MongoDB like server side public license, which came about because their business was being cannibalized by other cloud providers, right? And of course, like, license drama around licenses, it continues to be a thing where people feel like they deserve. Yeah, and to any engineers listening to this, I'm sorry for, hopefully this doesn't come off wrong, but like we are a privileged class and broadly can feel like we, that if a maintainer decides to change a license from one to another for their personal like benefit to make a project sustainable or whatever, people take that personally, I mean, it is especially true if it's done by a company, because people feel like it's a rug pull or whatever, and like also like all understandable and again, empathize with it, but it's fraught, and I think the really interesting thing is we haven't actually had anybody on the podcast to talk about this recently, but like there's a lot of open source projects that are actually closing to contribution because like a bunch of like drive-by vibe coded PRs and like just massive amounts of like new contributions coming in, and they're like, look, I'm not even going to try anymore. Like open an issue, open a discussion on GitHub or something like that, and then maybe we'll sort of like talk about it. But like,
wow,
I'm going to close your PR, I'm going to close your issue or whatever. And that's also the really interesting thing for me that I'm seeing a lot more of.
Wow, I did not. Yeah, that is crazy. Yeah, we haven't had a ton like that necessarily, but we have had, like punctuation changes in PRs. It's like kind of gaming, like how many PRs have you opened up in the last month a little bit. So there's like a little bit of a gamification going on. So it's like white space changes, punctuation changes, like what the heck? Fortunately for me, it hasn't been too much of a problem just yet, but man, that would be, yeah. I always think it's always just a good practice to open up an issue and talk about it. Like, hey, this is what I'm seeing or would like to see. Here's the strategy I'm going to go down. Thumbs up, thumbs down, before I go and like waste my time building out this pull request that you're not going to even review. So, I guess I'm not shocked really to hear that, to be honest, but kind of sucks to have to like close down all of that, just because of the amount of abuse.
I think the other thing I'll add, and I know that you've talked about this in other forums, is that like we're also seeing the sponsorship model is just like not scaling. There are very, 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 very few, and usually only big names, like maybe like Tanner and maybe like Evan Yu of Vue, and like you could probably count them on one or two hands, the number of people that are like really successful doing sponsorship. And they're also really, really freaking good, like top 0.001% or something of like developers. So it's like, I think that's an incredibly hard thing to do well to get any sort of like actual value. So
yeah, I agree. Even back in 2018 or whatever, when we was trying to think through some of these things and like go sponsorship route and do like, consulting or whatever, like even then it wasn't on a good trajectory, was my thought at the time. And to your point, it's like, yeah, you really had to be in the top 0.01% of, authors out there to make it work. And then you got to deal with like consulting potentially to like subsidize what it doesn't do. Yeah, I don't know. I've even thought about like, oh, it'd be cool to have like a marketplace of like apps, like Dockerized apps, and then you could charge, I'm actually kind of surprised that Docker didn't do this, to be honest, because we needed at one point like a way to host like kind of like private images, and like, oh yeah, like other users want to license this from us. So like, why can't Docker just like have a paid model where, like they're verified, they get all the security stuff or whatever, and you, I don't know, pay for pull, or I don't know how the model would necessarily work, but like, it seems like there's a need. I know I have it, of course, but I don't know. Just kind of an interesting business tactic I thought would be, and it would help with other people that like, hey, I built this really cool database engine. It's over here. You can pay for it, blah, 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 and like, yeah, I guess it depends on what part of the stack you're working software wise. But if it was like a fundamental layer or like a service of some kind, then that route seems to could have been a lot more sustainable, I think, going in the future. But we'll see.
Yeah, I've often thought the same thing of like NPM. Like there's this like kind of shadow ecosystem of like packages I can pay for, but like never know about. It's
Yeah.
you just kind of like happen upon them. You're like, oh wow, that here's a private registry thing that I could maybe do. But that it's not baked in seems like an obvious miss for developers and open source in general.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the amount of duplicative effort going on right now for like just supply chain verification. Like anytime we you know, get through a company and we're going through like vendor onboarding, it's like they have to do that all over again. And it's like if there was just some like supplier or whatever out there that just said, okay, like these are all verified, you don't have to think about it. Here's like a certificate or something for it, and then like just like get you through a lot faster, it would be super nice because every business like has to do the same process over and over and over and over and over again for every new vendor. And it just like this could be consolidated in some way and mass streamlined. But I don't know. If you're listening, go build that. I'll be your first customer, maybe.
So we said the magic words a little bit while ago. AI, it's changing the industry, really changing everything. I wouldn't have said that a year ago. It's kind of crazy for me to come full circle on this. But how has AI played into browserless, and like what changes have you made to kind of accommodate this new world that we live in?
Yeah, it's affected us on two fronts. I mean, we're consumers and producers in a sense for AI and models. A lot of those things out there that need real time access to the internet need a web browser at the end of the day to do that part. So we are, I guess, a cog in the wheel, so to speak, for a lot of AI ambitions going forward. Um, it does have a lot of same symptoms to like the data access problem. I know we kind of touched upon that a little bit earlier, but it's kind of the same questions I ask myself at the end of the day, like, did who owns these ideas? Do we own ideas? Who gets the dollar for it? And those are big, like bigger than me philosophical questions to a degree. But I think at the same time, genie's out of the bottle. This is like the internet again, but potentially even more so. And so like it's open, it's out there. So, what are you going to do about it, or how are you going to react to it? And so, kind of looking back on my history with, getting into dev, getting into like business running, I'd really stress to people that are like listening that are kind of scared about it. Cause, I went through that like depressed sorrow of like, shoot, all my skills I've worked so hard for are kind of like replaced. I'm like, no, you still need those. You still need like that compass, that internal, like, I don't know, we called it like your spider sense for bad code or whatever. There's that, like that thing that's inside of you that like, this is good, this is bad. Like that is still very much needed because, obviously you're not going to get perfect code from an AI as it stands today. But the amount of just like boring problems it can solve for you is just crazy. And so like, once you go through that valley of depression with it, you'll come out and like, oh man, I can do so much more. I don't have to think about like wiring all these things up. And, as long as you're okay or good at reviewing code, like you'll get a lot of benefit out of it. So, in terms of like the discipline of software engineering, I think it's still a tool. I don't think it's going to replace anybody soon. I think, they're still going to need somebody to like contextually understand things. And, there's a limit in my mind of like language. You can only like articulate so much about how a system can work. And sometimes it's like you just need to know a little bit, and it's hard to put into words exactly like behaviors or whatever. So at the end of the day, I had never met a PM that just couldn't tell me in perfect terms to get a prompt to work. So I feel like your jobs are still safe because you can like, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? And AI is not going to replace that anytime soon. So yeah, anyways, people are doing really cool stuff with it. I think it does feel like early internet times to me a lot. So I think trying to leverage it as best you can and being part of the narrative on like what's going to happen with it is more important than just sitting there frozen like, oh God, are we going to turn into the Matrix? Like, is everybody a machine? Am I married to a real person anymore? Like, no. This is a chance. Like, you have the time, you can go do something with that, for good or for bad or for nothing, and just let happen to you what happens. So anyways, I always like having a little bit of autonomy and like dictating like what happens and what doesn't. So I think that's kind of where I veer, is like I'd rather make use of these tools, leverage them well, talk about them well, and like in a good sense how to use them too. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It is fast paced. Every day I wake up and there's like a new N8N or Lovable or something like that we suddenly got to be a part of. And I was like, oh, that's cool. How come nobody told me about this? And we're like an adapter into their system now. So I guess I better figure out how this works. So yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. I hope it continues to be fun, and I hope it does veer in a good direction societally. Otherwise, we may all be robots someday. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so many unknowns. Like I've thought about this so much, and like my brain goes back to like the printing press and like all these other innovations that kind of like expanded access to information, like the internet as well. Like there's so many good things that comes from it, but like the dark side, the bad things that we can't predict and how it'll change our society. So it's like and the speed this time is just like unprecedented too. So it's like it's a crazy time to be alive, honestly.
Yeah, no, I think the speed at which it goes, and like I just keep coming back. It's a tool. At the end of the day, you can use a tool for a good thing or a bad thing. So, but like never using the tool and letting it, it or somebody else do something with it, I think is not good either. So I don't know. Yeah, use the tools for good things, I guess is the answer there.
Okay. Well, that wraps it up for our questions. Thanks for coming on, Joel. This was a fun conversation about everything browserless and all the data access and our lives in AI. It was a great time. So thanks for coming on.
Hey, appreciate it so much. Thanks for having me. It was great chatting with you both. And we'll see you on the flip side of the AI storm.
Yeah, thanks again, Joel. It's really cool to see what you're building. I think this is a hard space. I have a lot of appreciation for it, having had to do a few of these things in the past. And yeah, keep up the good work.
Awesome. Thanks.